Hey plant lovers, welcome back. I want to start with something that might feel like a betrayal. If you've ever bought a plant specifically because you saw it on a list called Best Air Purifying Plants, a pothos, a snake plant, a peace lily, you were sold a story that's only partially true. And I'm not saying this to make you feel bad. I'm saying it because the real truth about what those plants do for your home is actually more interesting than the headline. And it changes how you think about which plants belong in your space and why. Here's where the myth starts. In 1989, researchers at NASA, working with an agricultural trade association, placed a small number of houseplants inside sealed plexiglass chambers, roughly the size of a microwave. They pumped in concentrated formaldehyde, benzene, and trichloroethylene, came back 24 hours later, and measured how much had been absorbed. The results were striking. Some plants pulled out as much as 70% of the pollutants in that chamber. The study got a press release, the press release became headlines, and the headlines became a piece of plant folklore that has circulated on the internet ever since. You've read a version of it 100 times. NASA says these plants clean your air, but here's the part that got left out of every article. The plexiglass chambers were sealed. No ventilation, no windows, no airflow whatsoever. A real home, even a fairly airtight one in, say, Minneapolis in January, exchanges its indoor air with outdoor air somewhere between 3 and 6 times per hour. A 2019 analysis published in the Journal of Exposure Science and Environmental Epidemiology ran the numbers and concluded that in a typical building with normal ventilation, you would need somewhere between 10 and 1,000 plants per square meter of floor space to achieve the same VOC removal that the original NASA study found in a sealed box. 1 plant per room is not a meaningful air purifier, not even close. That's the honest part. Now here's what the same researchers found when they asked a different question. Because what plants do for indoor environments when you study them carefully, not in sealed boxes but in real rooms, over real time, with real people in them, turns out to be something the original headlines completely missed. And it's why these plants deserve a place in your home, even though the air purification story was oversold. There are 3 things plants reliably, measurably do. I want to walk through each one and then tell you exactly which plants do each of them best, with specific care guidance so you can actually grow them well. The first thing is something researchers call the rhizosphere effect, and it's genuinely worth understanding. The original NASA finding that got closest to the truth wasn't about the leaves at all. It was about the roots. The team found that the actual mechanism of VOC breakdown in their chamber plants was largely driven by the microbial communities living in the soil around the roots, the rhizosphere. Billions of bacteria and fungi that colonize plant root zones have the ability to metabolize and break down certain organic compounds. A 2022 review, published in Frontiers in Sustainable Cities, put it plainly. The VOC removal capacity of indoor plants is now mainly attributed to the microflora associated with the roots, not the leaf surface. The plant isn't a vacuum cleaner with leaves. It's more like a host for a living microbial filter buried in its potting mix. This is why the areca palm, Dipsis lutescens if you want the botanical name, keeps appearing in serious discussions of indoor plant function. What most people notice about this palm is the way the feathery fronds arch outward and fill a corner of a room, or the way the light catches the green and gold of the stems. It's a genuinely beautiful plant, the kind that earns its space on a visual level alone. But what matters for this conversation is what's happening underground. The areca palm develops a substantial, active root system that creates exactly the kind of dense rhizosphere environment where microbial activity is highest. It also releases moisture into the air at one of the highest rates of any common houseplant. A well-established specimen will push several hundred grams of water into the air per day through transpiration alone. In winter in dry climates, Denver, Salt Lake City, Minneapolis, Phoenix, when heating systems pull relative humidity down to 20 or 25%, that matters. Nasal passages dry out, skin dries out, colds and flu transmit more easily in low humidity indoor air. A few large areca palms in a room won't replace a dedicated humidifier, but they add measurable moisture to the local air around them, and that effect is real and documented. Areca palms want bright, indirect light, not direct sun, which bleaches the fronds, and consistently moist but well-draining soil. Water when the top inch is dry. They're not drought-tolerant. Let them fully dry out and the leaf tips go brown almost immediately. What they are tolerant of is lower light than you'd expect from a tropical palm. They'll slow down and stop pushing new growth in dim conditions, but they won't die. If your areca's tips brown even with consistent watering, the culprit is almost always fluoride in tap water. Switch to filtered water or let tap water sit out overnight before using it. The second thing that plants reliably do in indoor environments is something that deserves its own conversation, because it's the one the air purification story accidentally crowded out. They change us. Not the air chemistry in a way your instruments would measure. Us, the people in the room with them. In 2015, researchers at Chiba University in Japan conducted a randomized crossover study with 24 young adults. The participants were randomly assigned to one of two tasks: tending to indoor plants or working at a computer, and then switched. The researchers measured heart rate variability, blood pressure, and psychological self-reports before and after each task. The results were consistent. The plant task produced measurable suppression of sympathetic nervous system activity. Your sympathetic nervous system is the one that runs your fight or flight response. It's the system that keeps your blood pressure elevated when you're under stress. Suppressing it means the participants' bodies were genuinely, measurably relaxing. Not just reporting that they felt calmer, biologically calming. A 2021 study from Urban Forestry and Urban Greening surveyed more than 4,000 people about their emotional states during the COVID lockdown, and found that having vegetation at home was consistently correlated with more positive emotions, with the effect most pronounced for people living in smaller, plant-deprived spaces. These effects are not about air chemistry. They're about something older and more deeply wired into us. A response to living things in our immediate environment that likely goes back a very long way in human evolutionary history. The plants that contribute most to this psychological effect, based on the literature, share certain traits. They're living things with visible movement and growth. They require some regular care and attention, and they're complex enough visually to sustain attention without demanding it. Peace lilies check all of those boxes. They're also one of the most expressive plants you can own. They communicate directly with you, which is something I find useful. Peace lilies, spathiphyllum for the record, pronounced spathiphyllum, droop visibly and reliably when they need water. Not dramatically, not dangerously, but unmistakably. The leaves go from upright to softly pendulous in a way you can see from across the room. Water it, and within a few hours it stands back up. This is one of the few houseplants that gives you immediate, unambiguous feedback. And that feedback loop, the act of noticing, responding, watching recovery, is part of what makes plant care psychologically rewarding rather than just decorative. You're in a relationship with something living. Peace lilies tolerate lower light than almost anything else on this list. They evolved on the forest floor of Central and South American rainforests, where the canopy filters most of the light before it reaches them. A peace lily in a north-facing room in an apartment in Chicago will still grow. It won't bloom as frequently. For reliable blooming, you want a few hours of bright, indirect light each day. But it will survive and look good and respond to you. Water when it droops. Keep the soil consistently moist, not waterlogged. If the leaves develop yellow edges, that's often a sign of too much direct sun, which burns the chlorophyll along the margins. Peace lilies are not drought-adapted plants. Their roots are not built to dry out completely. Consistent moisture, indirect light, and occasional fertilizing in spring and summer, a balanced liquid fertilizer diluted to half strength once a month, is all they need. If you're finding value in this kind of science-backed plant content, I'd love to have you subscribe. That's how this channel keeps going and how we can keep going deeper on topics like this. The third thing plants do reliably is something that's easy to dismiss until you actually look at the research. They change the humidity of the immediate environment around them. Not the whole room. The effect is more localized than that. But in the microclimate around a cluster of actively growing plants, transpiration raises relative humidity in a measurable way. The key word there is cluster. A single small pothos on a windowsill adds almost nothing. But group 6, 8, 10 actively growing plants together, and you create a pocket of higher humidity that can benefit both the plants themselves and the air immediately around them. This is why the best strategy for indoor humidity with plants isn't which plant humidifies best, but which combination of plants in which arrangement maximizes the shared effect. And the best plants for that purpose are the ones with the highest leaf surface area and the highest transpiration rates, which means large-leaved tropical plants in active growth. The rubber plant, Ficus elastica, is one of the most overlooked plants for this purpose, and one of the most architecturally dramatic houseplants you can own. In their native habitat across Southeast Asia, from the foothills of the Himalayas through northeastern India and into Malaysia, rubber trees grow as emergent canopy trees, reaching 30 meters in height. The name comes from the white latex, a form of natural rubber, that bleeds from any cut in the bark or stem. Handle a freshly pruned rubber plant with gloves if your skin is sensitive. The latex causes contact dermatitis in some people. Indoors they're contained, obviously. But even in a pot, they push upward with a vigor that tropical forest trees express even in captivity. The large, stiff, glossy leaves, some cultivars a deep burgundy, some a bright lime green, some variegated with pink and white cream margins. Each represents significant leaf surface area, and each is transpiring moisture through stomata continuously throughout the day. A healthy rubber plant with 20 or 30 large leaves is releasing a meaningful volume of moisture into the room around it. Rubber plants want bright, indirect light, bright enough that you can comfortably read a book in the spot, but not direct afternoon sun, which can bleach and spot the leaves. They're more drought-tolerant than most tropical plants, storing water in those thick, succulent leaves, so you can let the top 2 inches of soil dry out before watering again. The biggest mistake people make with rubber plants is the same one made with most ficus family members: moving them. When you move a rubber plant, especially to a spot with lower light, it drops leaves, sometimes dramatically. Pick your spot carefully, put it there, and leave it there. The plant stabilizes once it adapts to its position, and once established, it can grow a foot or more per year in good conditions. Wipe the leaves down monthly with a damp cloth. This isn't just aesthetic. Every layer of household dust on a leaf is blocking light from reaching the chlorophyll, reducing photosynthesis, and reducing transpiration. A clean leaf is a working leaf. Now I want to talk about 2 plants that deserve more credit than they get, because they represent a specific kind of value that doesn't show up in the air purification narrative at all. The spider plant, Chlorophytum comosum, is one of the easiest plants alive, and one of the most interesting, once you understand what it's actually doing. It originated in tropical and southern Africa, growing in the dappled light at the edges of forest clearings, and it adapted to those conditions by becoming extraordinarily efficient at photosynthesis in variable light. It can grow in low light, medium light, and bright indirect light, slowing its growth rate as conditions become less favorable, but continuing to function. In your home, this means you can put it almost anywhere. What makes spider plants interesting is the runners. After a spider plant is established, usually in its first full growing season, it begins sending out long, arching stolons, and at the tips of those stolons, it produces plantlets, miniature copies of itself that dangle in the air until they touch soil, or you cut them free and root them. 1 plant becomes 3 plants, becomes 10 plants. You can root the plantlets by placing them in a glass of water until roots develop, then potting them up. Within a year of owning a single spider plant from a 4-inch pot at your local Home Depot or Lowe's, you can have spider plants in every room of your house for free. That matters in the context of this video because the benefits of having plants in your indoor environment scale with quantity. More plants, more transpiration, more rhizosphere microbiome activity, more visual living complexity that benefits your nervous system. Spider plants are also one of the few houseplants certified non-toxic to cats and dogs by the ASPCA, something that matters enormously if you have pets, since several of the most commonly sold houseplants, including pothos and philodendrons, are toxic to pets if ingested. Brown leaf tips on spider plants almost always indicate one of two things: fluoride in tap water or humidity that's too low. Filtered water and a cluster grouping with other plants usually fixes both. The golden pothos, Epipremnum aureum, is the plant I would give to someone who has killed every plant they've ever owned and told me they have a black thumb. Not because it's boring or unchallenging, but because it's genuinely forgiving in a way that allows even an inattentive caretaker to develop a successful relationship with something living. And that first success changes people. It changed me. Pothos tolerate irregular watering, low light, average humidity, and most soil mixes. What they do not tolerate is complete darkness or sustained wet feet. The low light claim gets abused constantly. People read it as no light and put pothos in interior rooms with no natural light at all, then wonder why the plant slowly deteriorates over months. Low light means the plant can function without direct sunlight. It does not mean the plant can function without any light. 3 or 4 feet from a window is usually enough. The trailing vines of a pothos are worth mentioning specifically because of what they mean for the rhizosphere discussion. A mature pothos with several long trails from a hanging basket or shelf develops a substantial root system in the pot, and that root system, with a rich soil microbiome if you're using a quality potting mix, is the actual engine of whatever VOC processing is happening. Small pothos in small pots do almost nothing. A large, well-established pothos with a dense root ball is doing meaningfully more. If you want your plants to function, give them room to grow. And here's a care detail that surprises most people. Pothos vines that hang downward eventually stop putting out new, healthy leaves. The leaves at the tips of long hanging trails tend to get smaller and smaller, and the plant loses its full leaf appearance. What fixes this is a trellis or moss pole, something for the vine to climb. When a pothos climbs, it reads that signal as successfully reaching toward a canopy in its native forest habitat, and it responds by putting out larger, more robust leaves. A climbing pothos is a more vigorous plant than a trailing one. I also want to spend a moment on the English ivy because it appears on every air purification list and deserves more honest treatment than it usually gets. English ivy, Hedera helix, is genuinely interesting as a plant. It has an unusual growth habit that almost no one talks about. Juvenile ivy, the kind you buy at a garden center with the familiar lobed leaves, is botanically a different expression of the same plant as adult ivy, which produces unlobed leaves and actually flowers and fruits. When conditions trigger the transition from juvenile to adult growth, the leaf shape changes entirely. It's an example of heterophily, different leaf forms on the same plant, that plant biologists find fascinating. As a houseplant, ivy wants cooler temperatures than most people's homes. It evolved in the temperate forests of Europe and Western Asia, where conditions are cool and moist. In a warm, dry interior, the average American home kept at 72 degrees in winter, ivy struggles. It's more susceptible to spider mites in those conditions, and spider mites are the thing that kills most indoor ivy. If you want to grow ivy successfully indoors, keep it in the coolest room you have, an unheated bedroom, a mudroom, near a drafty window in winter, and give it high humidity. It does well in a bright bathroom with a shower that gets used regularly. One critical note before we move on. English ivy is toxic to pets and children. The saponins in the leaves cause digestive problems in dogs and cats, and even skin contact can cause irritation in some people. Hang it high, Keep it in rooms where pets don't go, and wash your hands after handling it. This is non-negotiable. The last plant I want to cover is the one that actually does what the air freshener plants on most lists only pretend to do. Gardenia. Gardenia jasminoides. And I want to be clear about what it does, because it's completely different from everything else we've discussed. Gardenia does not filter air. It does not absorb VOCs. What it does is produce one of the most distinctive, complex floral fragrances of any plant you can grow indoors. A scent that contains over 30 documented volatile compounds, including cis-jasmone, linalool, and methyl-anthranilate, which together create the heavy, sweet, almost intoxicating smell that perfumers have been trying to replicate synthetically for decades. A blooming gardenia in a bedroom in March is not a treatment for sick building syndrome. It's something else entirely. Evidence that you can grow something demanding and beautiful and keep it alive through winter and coax it into bloom through patient attention to its specific needs. That has its own value. Gardenias are acidophiles. They need acidic soil with a pH between 5 and 6. Regular potting mix is typically too alkaline. Use a mix formulated for azaleas or rhododendrons, or amend your existing mix with perlite and a small amount of sulfur. Water with filtered or rainwater when possible. The minerals in hard tap water gradually raise soil pH and lock out the iron that gardenias need for their dark green foliage. If you see yellowing leaves with green veins, that pattern is called chlorosis. It almost certainly means the pH has drifted too alkaline and iron is unavailable to the plant. An acidifying fertilizer corrects it over several weeks. Gardenias need bright indirect light, consistent temperatures between 65 and 75 degrees, and high humidity, at least 50%. The biggest single cause of gardenia bud drop, which is the heartbreak of growing them, is a sudden temperature change or a dry blast of air from a heating vent hitting the plant while buds are forming. Keep them away from vents, away from drafty windows, and cluster them with other plants to maintain that humidity microclimate. When you get it right, and it takes a season or two to learn the specific microclimate in your home, the bloom is unlike anything else. Here's what I'd leave you with, because I think it matters. The plants we've talked about today, areca palms, peace lilies, rubber plants, spider plants, pothos, English ivy, gardenias, each have real, specific things to offer. Not the things the marketing copy says. The rhizosphere microbiome work is real. The transpiration effect is real. The nervous system response to living with plants is real and documented. The fragrance of a gardenia is real in a way no air freshener ever will be. What none of them will do is replace ventilation, or substitute for actually opening a window, or fix indoor air quality in a way that shows up on a detector. The people who sold you the air purification story oversimplified the research, because oversimplified research travels better on the internet than nuance does. But nuance is where the actual usefulness lives. Before I go, if you've been growing any of these plants already and you've had a specific experience, an areca palm that transformed a dry room in winter, a peace lily that drooped and recovered like clockwork, a gardenia that finally bloomed, I want to hear about it. Drop it in the comments below, because those specifics help everyone in this community learn from real conditions and real homes. And that's worth more than any general tip I can give you. And if you know someone who bought a plant because they saw it on an air purifier list, share this video with them. Getting the actual science into people's hands is exactly the point. Take care of your plants.